They promised Russian NATO wouldn't expand eastward, but today, NATO sits right on Russia's doorstep. Was this betrayal or strategic survival? In this video, we'll uncover the untold story behind NATO's relentless expansion after the Cold War, from secret diplomatic promises to the dramatic confrontations we're witnessing today. Did the West ignite Cold War 2.0, or was this the inevitable consequence of Russia's own ambitions? Stay with me till the end as we explore the truth behind what might be the most dangerous geopolitical gamble of our time. In 1949, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed. The idea was simple. An attack on one would be considered an attack on all. Its founding members included the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European nations. The main goal was to counter the growing threat of the Soviet Union. But what many people don't realize is that NATO's creation wasn't just about defense. It was also about binding European nations to American leadership and preventing the rise of another Nazi Germany by integrating West Germany into a collective security framework. For the next 4 decades, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union's military alliance, stared each other down across the Iron Curtain. The Cold War was a nuclear standoff, with Europe as the potential battleground. Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. By 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed. Suddenly, the enemy NATO was built to contain had ceased to exist. Here is where the controversy begins. In February 1990, as the U.S. Secretary of State James Baker met Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to negotiate German reunification, Baker famously told Gorbachev that NATO would move not 1 inch eastward. This was interpreted as a promise that NATO wouldn't expand into former Soviet territories. Documents declassified in 2017 showed that multiple Western leaders, including West Germany's Chancellor Helmut Kohl and Britain's Prime Minister John Major, told Soviet leaders that NATO expansion was off the table. Yet by the late 1990s, things had changed dramatically. In 1999, NATO added Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. These countries argued that after decades under Soviet domination, they deserved the protection and economic stability NATO membership offered. Russia saw this as a betrayal. It believed the West had exploited its moment of weakness to advance NATO's borders closer to Moscow. However, the U.S. insisted that no promises were broken because no formal treaty prohibited NATO enlargement. In 2004, NATO expanded further to include Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Bulgaria, and Romania. This brought NATO right up to Russia's borders in the Baltics. By 2008, the U.S. pushed to admit Georgia and Ukraine. Russia viewed this as an existential threat. Later that year, Georgia's conflict with its breakaway region South Ossetia escalated into war with Russia. Georgia's NATO ambitions were crushed as Russian troops remain in South Ossetia to this day. The story repeated with Ukraine. In 2014, after pro-European protests toppled Ukraine's Russia-leaning president, Moscow annexed Crimea and fueled separatist movements in eastern Ukraine. For Russia, NATO's encroachment in Ukraine crossed a red line. For NATO, it was Ukraine's sovereign right to choose alliances. By 2022, this tension exploded when Russia invaded Ukraine, demanding a guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO. The problem is clear. NATO's expansion, intended to secure peace, has arguably created a new age of hostility. Critics argue that by ignoring Russia's security concerns, NATO fueled Russian nationalism and aggression. Others argue that without NATO membership, Eastern European nations would remain vulnerable to Russian imperialism. NATO claims its expansion is purely defensive. New member states willingly sought NATO protection due to historical fear of Russian domination. After all, these nations were invaded or controlled by Russia or the Soviet Union in the past. From NATO's perspective, no country should have veto power over another's alliance choices. Russia sees NATO's eastward march as an existential encirclement. Imagine if Russia formed an alliance with Mexico and Canada and stationed missiles there. The U.S. wouldn't tolerate it. This was the logic of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Russia sees NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia as equivalent. Many political scientists argue that NATO expansion broke the post-Cold War order and triggered Russia's aggressive foreign policy. Others argue Russia would have intervened in its neighborhood regardless. To maintain its influence today, NATO has 32 members, with Finland and Sweden joining recently due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finland shares a 1,300 kilometers border with Russia, adding further tension. NATO's combined defense spending in 2023 was over $1.3 trillion, with the U.S. alone contributing over 70%. Russia's defense budget, in comparison, is around $110 billion, making it about one-tenth of NATO's. This disparity fuels Russia's sense of threat, despite NATO's insistence that it poses no offensive danger. The key moment came on February 24th, 2022, when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. For Russia, this was a preemptive strike to stop NATO's expansion. For NATO, it confirmed why expansion was necessary. Russia was willing to invade sovereign nations. This war has pushed NATO to strengthen its eastern flank, stationing troops in Poland, the Baltics, and Romania, while increasing military aid to Ukraine. Ukraine still aspires to join NATO, though membership remains stalled due to the ongoing war. Georgia, too, is left in limbo. If NATO admits Ukraine, it risks direct war with Russia. If it doesn't, it leaves Ukraine vulnerable to further aggression. This dilemma defines the heart of modern European security that Teo summarized. NATO was formed to counter Soviet threats. Verbal promises in 1990 remain contested to this day. Expansion eastward gave security to Eastern Europe but fueled Russian paranoia. Russia's invasions of Georgia and Ukraine were driven partly by NATO fears. Today's war in Ukraine may be the tragic culmination of broken trust, aggressive geopolitics, and clashing security doctrines. Whether NATO expansion prevented war by deterring Russia or caused it by provoking Russia remains one of the most controversial questions in modern history. If you want to uncover how Russia's invasion of Ukraine could reshape global power forever, watch the next video popping up right now.